The borrow that broke the bond. I thought lending money to family was an act of love. But love doesn't mean being their ATM. And sometimes the only way to teach a lesson is to finally say no. My name is Samantha Blake, but everyone calls me Sam. If you'd met me 5 years ago, you'd probably say I was too kind for my own good. I believed in second chances, and third, and fourth. Especially when it came to my sister, Chloe. We grew up close. 2 years apart, inseparable as kids. Where I was cautious, Chloe was daring. Where I saved, she spent. Where I studied, she schemed. But despite our differences, I loved her fiercely. She was my sister, the only person who'd seen me through every heartbreak, every dream, every mistake. Or so I thought. It started small, $100 here, $50 there. Just until Friday, she'd say. Then Friday would become next week. Next week would become next month. I didn't mind at first. She was between jobs, struggling with bills, and I wanted to help. But then the numbers grew. $300. $500. $1,200. One afternoon, she called crying, saying her car had broken down and she needed $2,000 for repairs. She swore she'd pay me back as soon as she got her next client. I hesitated. But hearing her voice, small, trembling, desperate, I gave in. I wired the money that same day. She texted, "You're a lifesaver, Sam. I promise, this is the last time." I wanted to believe her. I always did. Love makes you blind to red flags. Especially when they're waving in the hands of someone you can't imagine betraying you. Months passed. Chloe stopped mentioning repayment. Every time I brought it up, she brushed it off. "Don't worry, I've got you," she'd say. But her tone, light, dismissive, made it sound like I was the one being unreasonable. The uneasy feeling grew when I noticed small inconsistencies in her stories. One day, her car was still in the shop. The next week, she posted a selfie from a luxury spa. A month later, she was tagging herself in Vegas. I stared at her posts in disbelief. The same woman who'd sobbed about not affording rent was now sipping champagne poolside. I wanted to believe there was a mistake, that maybe someone else had paid for it, or she'd landed a miracle gig. But in my gut, I knew the truth. If you've ever been taken advantage of by someone you love, subscribe. Because sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we teach through silence. The final straw came 6 months later. I logged into my savings account one morning to transfer money for a down payment on a small condo I'd been dreaming about. But when I checked the balance, my heart froze. $8,400, gone. I stared at the screen, blinking, convinced I'd typed the wrong password. Then I saw the withdrawals, small, spread out, each one labeled with subtle variations of my name. It didn't make sense. Until I noticed the transfer destination, an account number I didn't recognize. Except I did. It was Chloe's. My mind went blank. My chest tightened. She had my online banking access from years ago, back when I helped her pay bills after a breakup. I'd forgotten to revoke it. And she'd used it. I called her immediately. She didn't pick up. I called again. Voicemail. By the third call, she answered, cheerful, like nothing was wrong. "Hey, sis. What's up? What's up?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "You stole my savings, Chloe." There was a long pause. Then she sighed, like I was the one being dramatic. "Don't say it like that, Sam. I borrowed it. You know I was struggling." "Borrowed?" I cut her off. "Without asking? Without telling me?" She scoffed. "You've got a good job. You'll make it back. I just needed it more than you right now." The audacity in her tone hit me harder than the theft itself. This wasn't guilt. It was entitlement. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It just rewrites every memory you thought was safe. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch staring at the ceiling, alternating between rage and heartbreak. My sister, my best friend, had stolen not just my money, but my trust. By morning, the anger had hardened into resolve. I wasn't going to call the police. I wasn't going to beg for my money back. I was going to do something far quieter, and far more effective. I was going to teach her. You can't control how someone betrays you. But you can control how you rise after it. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't punishment. It's transformation. The lesson begins. There's a moment when anger turns into clarity. When you stop asking, why would they do this, and start asking, what am I going to do about it? The day after I discovered the theft, I sat in my kitchen with a notebook and a cup of coffee gone cold. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the kind of adrenaline that comes when betrayal burns too deeply to cry over anymore. I could have gone to the police. I could have called the bank and filed a fraud report. But deep down, I knew how that story would play out. She'd cry. My parents would beg me to not ruin her life. And somehow, I'd become the villain for holding her accountable. No. This time, I wanted Chloe to learn what loss felt like, not through revenge, but through revelation. I started by documenting everything, screenshots of the transfers, bank records, timestamps, even her messages about borrowing. Then, I called my bank. The representative was sympathetic but firm. Since the transfers came from a recognized device and login, it wasn't technically fraud. My stomach dropped. But I thanked her anyway, because now, I knew that the system wouldn't protect me. I had to protect myself. So I froze my accounts, opened new ones under security monitoring, and moved my remaining savings out of reach. Then, I did something Chloe would never expect. I invited her to lunch. Forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook. Sometimes, it's giving them just enough rope to see what they've done. When she arrived, she looked radiant, new bag, new manicure, a kind of confidence that made my blood boil. She hugged me like nothing was wrong. "Sam. You look so tired. Rough week?" I stared at her. "Something like that." We ordered. Small talk filled the first few minutes. Work, mutual friends, empty chatter. Then I leaned forward and said quietly, "You know, I found out about the transfers." Her smile faltered for a moment, but she recovered fast. "Sam, I told you I'd pay you back. You don't need to make it weird." I let out a slow breath. "I don't think you understand. This wasn't borrowing, Chloe. This was theft. You took $8,000 without asking." She rolled her eyes. "God, you're so dramatic. You've always had money. You'll be fine. Why can't you just let things go?" I stared at her, not the sister I'd grown up with, but a stranger who wore her face. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself, would never enable her again. If you've ever had to stop saving someone who keeps burning you, subscribe. Because sometimes love means saying, "I'm done protecting you from yourself." A week later, I started my plan. I didn't confront her again. I didn't chase her. I didn't even ask for the money back. Instead, I waited. See, Chloe had one weakness stronger than greed: attention. She couldn't stand being ignored. She thrived on chaos, arguments, and emotional reaction. When I gave her silence, it unsettled her. I blocked her on social media. I muted her number. And when our parents asked why I hadn't called her, I simply said, "Ask Chloe." It didn't take long before the cracks showed. 2 weeks later, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, all false tears and frantic energy. "Sam, what's going on? You're acting so cold lately." I said I'd pay you back. I looked her straight in the eye. "I don't need your money anymore. I've accepted the loss." Her confusion flickered into anger. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, calmly, that you no longer have access to me. My trust, my help, or my name. You wanted independence so badly, now you have it. Her jaw clenched. You're unbelievable. After everything I've done for you. I laughed softly. After everything you've taken, you mean? She left in a fury, slamming the door behind her. But for the first time in years, I felt free. When you stop being someone's safety net, they'll call you selfish. But in truth, you're just choosing not to fall with them anymore. Months passed. I focused on rebuilding my savings, setting firm financial boundaries, and learning to say no without guilt. Meanwhile, word got around, quietly, that Chloe's projects weren't doing well. Her landlord called me once, thinking I was her emergency contact. She's 3 months behind on rent, he said. I replied gently, I'm sorry, but I'm not responsible for her. That phrase, I'm not responsible for her, became my mantra. Not out of spite, but out of peace. And then, karma came quietly. One morning, I received an email from a mutual acquaintance, a small business owner Chloe had convinced to invest in a partnership. Except, according to the email, Chloe had disappeared with the funds. I didn't reply. I didn't warn her. I didn't gloat. I just let it happen. Because sometimes, life doesn't need your help to deliver the lesson. She thought money was power. But she forgot that integrity is the one currency that never runs out. When she hit bottom, I chose the hard kind of mercy. There's a difference between punishment and consequence. One is revenge, the other is a mirror you wish they'd see sooner. When Chloe's little empire of half-promises and fast money began to collapse, it didn't do so with drama. It unraveled with dull, persistent sounds, unanswered emails, bounced checks, texts that went unread. She lost the Vegas weekend, then she lost the spa memberships, then she lost the apartment where she'd posted that smiling selfie the week before. The first time reality leaned close enough to actually be felt, it was the landlord who knocked on Mom's door asking for rent. Mom called me with a voice that sounded thin. Sam, she's been asking me to help. I don't know what to do. I could hear the pleading under the sentence. Years of defaulting to help had taught my mother a reflex she couldn't stop. I didn't answer right away. I'd already chosen my boundary, no bailouts. But boundaries aren't cruelty if handled with intention. They're structure. So I put my phone on speaker and listened to my mother talk herself in circles, shame circling like a fly, before I spoke. Mom, I said, quietly, she needs to face the consequences so she can learn to stop causing harm. We can help her find resources. We can help her get back on her feet without making her believe borrowing without asking is okay. There was a long silence. Then, will you help me talk to her? It was the smallest crack in the armor. Teaching someone to be accountable is the cruelest kindness they'll ever accept. We staged an intervention that wasn't flashy, just Mom, me, and Chloe in the living room, the autumn light shallow across the carpet. Mom had bought a notebook and pretended it was for recipes so Chloe wouldn't feel cornered. I'd rehearsed what I'd say enough times that the words felt memorized but honest. Chloe, I began, I love you. That's not the problem. The problem is that you took what wasn't yours and used it to live like you hadn't hurt anyone. That ends now. She laughed at first, that defensive, high laugh that always meant she was turning to stone. Sam, you're being dramatic. I'll pay it back. Don't make it worse than it is. I put the notebook down and reached for a different tact. If you want me to trust you again, you need something more than promises. You need a plan, recorded steps, and accountability. She rolled her eyes, but Mom sat forward, hands clasped. We can help you with that. We'll call the rental office, get a payment arrangement, we'll help you apply for a part-time job, her voice cracked. But you do the rest. Chloe's shoulders sagged in a way I'd never seen, like a child finally dropping a heavy costume. For the first time, she looked tired in a way that wasn't performative. It was raw. She agreed, not with big words, but with small, concrete nods. We drafted a repayment schedule she could tolerate. We helped her update her resume. We found a local financial counselor who offered sliding scale appointments. I insisted she sign a very practical thing, a written agreement outlining the repayment terms and acknowledging the transfers she'd made from my account. It felt formal, legal, and cold, because it had to be. Soft words hadn't worked. If you're learning to protect yourself while still choosing compassion, subscribe. Because sometimes mercy wears a timetable. The first month was excruciating. Chloe turned up late for interviews, then proud about minor rejections. She took temp work at a catering company where the hours were brutal but honest. She came to the apartment twice a week to cook dinner for Mom in exchange for a small portion of the rent she owed. She cried more than she'd ever cried in public. But there were also days she'd look up from the plate she'd scrubbed and say, "Sam, I don't know how you did it. You could have cut me off ages ago." And I'd answer, "I almost did." But cutting someone off is a one-time event. Teaching them how to stand is forever. A few weeks in, one of the business owners Chloe'd conned, the one I'd heard about in that email, called my mother. He was furious, ready to sue. Mom was shaking. This was the moment when the plan either held or collapsed. I spoke to him directly. I didn't excuse Chloe. I didn't blame him either. I explained the repayment schedule, described the counseling, and offered to mediate a reasonable restitution plan. Then I said something I hadn't expected to say out loud: "She stole from the wrong people. But she's in the right hands now, if you'll let us work this out." He agreed to meet. It wasn't forgiveness so much as pragmatism. Money had to be repaid, and mine wasn't the only line on the ledger. Accountability isn't a single harsh day. It's paperwork, calls, rescheduling, and the long, boring work of making amends. Months passed in small increments. Chloe's checks started to clear for a few $100s here and there. She kept 2 appointments a month with the counselor. She began to ask less for attention and more for advice. She volunteered at a thrift store to spend time in a place where things cost less but dignity could be restored. One late night, I found a list in her handwriting tucked between bills, a meticulous ledger of every dollar taken, every dollar repaid, every penalty fee. She'd drawn little progress bars and ticked them off like some embarrassed monument. I didn't confront her about finding it. Instead, I sat with the sight of it and felt a strange tenderness. She'd made theft into arithmetic. She'd turned chaos into numbers. Maybe it was the first adult thing she'd done for herself. But the rebuilding wasn't linear. There were setbacks. She lied about a loan, got called out, and then begged forgiveness with a sincerity that hurt more than the theft ever did. There were moments when my rage flared, when I'd see her laughing with old friends who'd cheered her schemes, or when she'd make a careless purchase as if the debt didn't exist. Each time, I remembered why I'd drawn the line. I also remembered why I'd stayed, because accountability without support is punishment, support without accountability is enabling. The hardest moment came when she got a call from an ex-investor threatening litigation. She collapsed in the street outside my mother's house and didn't move until I sat with her and held her hand. She was exhausted, not from running but from finally stopping. "I don't want to be that person anymore," she whispered. "I don't know how." "You do it one day at a time," I told her. "Start with paying back $1. Then another. Show up. Say the truth. Do the small things with honesty. Teaching a lesson that lasts isn't revenge. It's patience, structure, and the courage to let someone suffer the consequences while still being a person who helps them stand back up. The lesson that became love. The hardest lessons aren't learned through punishment. They're learned through the slow rebuilding of trust. One act of honesty at a time. The winter Chloe finally began to change didn't arrive with dramatic tears or big apologies. It came quietly, with the sound of her showing up on time. She got a full-time job at a local bakery, waking before dawn to roll dough and serve coffee. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, something solid beneath her feet for the first time in years. Every Friday, like clockwork, I'd get a text. "Transfer sent, $125 this week." There were no excuses. No forgotten promises. No manipulation. Just consistency. And slowly, what had felt impossible, trusting her again, began to feel, not natural, but possible. One snowy evening, she showed up at my apartment with a grocery bag full of homemade pastries. "I brought something," she said, shyly. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the room as she set the bag down. I poured 2 mugs of tea, and for the first time in years, we sat together without a wall of resentment between us. "I'm not done paying you back," she said softly, "but I needed to tell you something." I raised an eyebrow. "Okay." "I've been working with the counselor still. She says guilt is only useful when it turns into responsibility." So, she pulled a folded paper from her jacket and handed it to me. It was a statement, an official record from her credit union showing her final payment to the man she'd conned in her business scam. At the bottom, the balance read, $0. Tears filled my eyes. She looked down at her hands. "It's not everything, but I wanted to start making things right, really right. You were the only one who didn't give up on me, even when I deserved it. Forgiveness isn't forgetting the wound. It's watching the person who hurt you learn how to stop causing pain. And letting them." A few months later, the final repayment came. Chloe texted me. "Balance cleared. Check your account. Thank you for everything." When I saw the transfer, my breath caught, not because of the money, but because it symbolized the end of something far bigger. I replied simply, "I'm proud of you. Truly." That night, I went to bed feeling lighter than I had in years. But the real closure didn't come until weeks later. Mom's birthday was coming up, and we'd decided, cautiously, to have a small family dinner together for the first time in a long time. I arrived early to help cook, half expecting tension to fill the air the moment Chloe walked in. But when she did, something was different. She didn't arrive dressed like she was performing. She didn't try to charm anyone. She brought a handmade cake, simple but beautiful, and placed it on the table like an offering. "Happy birthday, Mom," she said. Then she turned to me. "Sam. I know I said sorry 100 times, but I want to say it once more, for real. You taught me that love isn't about rescuing. It's about respecting boundaries. I get that now." I blinked hard, trying not to cry in front of everyone. Mom stood up and hugged us both. And for a moment, it wasn't about money or betrayal or consequences. It was about the fragile, quiet miracle of family, broken, rebuilt, and still standing. If you believe people can change, not through revenge, but through reflection, subscribe. Because redemption isn't about winning. It's about healing. Months rolled into a year, and something beautiful began to bloom between us again. Chloe invited me to her bakery's grand reopening, a small shop she'd saved up to buy with another coworker. When I arrived, I saw her behind the counter, hair tied back, apron dusted with flour, greeting customers with genuine warmth. There was no trace of the arrogance, no hint of the manipulation that had once defined her. As I ordered a latte, she winked. "Don't worry, this one's on the house. Paid in full." We laughed. And it wasn't forced. Later that evening, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note that said, "You taught me the real cost of stealing, and the priceless gift of earning back trust. Thank you for letting me learn the hard way. Love, Chloe." I didn't cry this time. I just hugged her, not out of pity, but pride. Because sometimes the best lessons aren't shouted. They're lived. She stole thousands, and I lost more than money that day. I lost the version of her I thought I knew. But in the space left behind, we both found something else. Strength, honesty, and the kind of love that doesn't depend on weakness. The lesson wasn't mine to teach. It was hers to learn. And she did. If you've ever been betrayed by family, remember, your boundaries don't make you cruel. They make healing possible.